Late in the evening, Sterling Beaumont found himself driving down a nearly deserted highway, the hum of the engine the only sound in a silent world. He was not a man who often courted isolation. In fact, most would describe him as the very embodiment of modern business success, a person whose phone never stopped buzzing, whose schedule was overflowing with high-stakes meetings and jet-setting flights across the country. Yet tonight, something had compelled him to break from his usual routine and take the scenic route outside the city limits. He wanted time to think, to regroup, to escape the unrelenting pressures of his corporate empire if only for a few hours. The moon hung low in the sky, casting pale light on the ribbon of asphalt stretching into the distance. On both sides of the road, empty fields merged with the horizon, their contours lost in the darkness. Streetlights were sparse here, offering only faint glimpses of the terrain. Despite the solitude, Sterling felt oddly at peace, until his headlights swept across a lone figure seated on the concrete guardrail just ahead. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. It was rare to see anyone in these parts, especially so late, and certainly not sitting by the roadside with nothing but a small bag at her feet. Slowing down, Sterling peered out the windshield. The figure belonged to a young woman with her arms wrapped around herself, as if trying to ward off the night's chill. Her posture spoke of exhaustion, and even from a distance, he sensed a quiet determination that stood out sharply against the emptiness of the landscape. Driven by instinct more than reason, Sterling pulled over to the side of the road. The sudden cessation of the car's engine replaced the quiet hum with a silence that felt charged, expectant. He lowered the window, and a cool gust of wind whipped inside, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant rain. "Are you all right?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle yet firm. He was aware that approaching a stranger out here could be intimidating, especially for a young woman alone. The headlights lit the scene like a dim spotlight, revealing her face as she turned toward him. She had delicate features and wide, searching eyes that seemed to shine with a blend of caution and relief. She hesitated a moment before speaking, as if deciding whether to trust him. "My name is Rowena Finch," she finally said. Her voice was soft but steady, betraying neither fear nor easy familiarity. I'm fine, thank you. It's just that my ride fell through, and there's no way for me to leave this place on my own." Sterling pushed open the car door and stepped onto the asphalt. The night air was cooler than he expected, and the distant rustle of the wind through the fields emphasized just how alone they were. He approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. Rowena stood up from the guardrail, maintaining a polite distance. She clutched the strap of her small backpack, a worn-looking thing that had seen better days, and regarded him with a mixture of hope and residual mistrust. "Is there someone you can call?" Sterling asked, glancing around and seeing no other vehicles for miles. The empty road gave him an uneasy feeling. He could sense how vulnerable she must be out here. "I can give you a ride, or I can help you find a better place to stay until morning." Rowena shook her head, her eyes downcast for a moment. "No. I don't have anyone I can call," she said. There was an undercurrent of sadness in her voice. "But if you're heading into the city, I'd be grateful for a lift." He couldn't help but notice the way she avoided details about who might be looking for her. This piqued his curiosity. People usually had at least one friend or family member they could contact. Yet here she was, alone and apparently with no one to rely on but a total stranger. Still, something in her gaze told him she was no mere drifter or hitchhiker. That quiet dignity he sensed was genuine, and he felt an urge to protect her that he could not entirely explain. "All right," he said at last, gesturing toward his car. "I'll take you wherever you need to go." Rowena nodded and, after a brief moment of hesitation, followed him to the passenger side. Sterling opened the door for her, and she slipped in, grateful to be off the roadside and out of the cold. Once seated, she placed her backpack on her lap and looked straight ahead, as though bracing herself for any number of unpredictable outcomes. Sterling walked back around and got into the driver's seat. He glanced at her sideways, noting how her posture was tense but her expression calm. She seemed wary, but not terrified, like someone who had decided to trust him, at least for now, because she had no better option. Flicking the headlights back onto high beam, he eased the car onto the road again, the darkness swallowing them in every direction. For a minute or two, neither spoke. The hum of the engine returned, a steady backdrop to their unspoken questions. The quiet was thick with unvoiced concerns, yet there was also a kind of solace in it, as if both recognized that any words right now might break the fragile peace. Finally, Rowena took a breath, as though mustering her courage. "Thank you," she said simply, turning to face him. "I know you didn't have to stop. Not everyone would." Sterling gave a slight shrug, his eyes locked on the road. "It's not safe out here. I couldn't just drive by, knowing you needed help." She nodded, her expression softening a fraction. Still, it was kind. Silence settled in again, but it felt less heavy than before. Sterling's mind, however, was anything but quiet. He kept stealing glances at his mysterious passenger. Who was she? Why was she stranded in the middle of nowhere at such a late hour? The riddle of her circumstances clung to his thoughts, stirring an unfamiliar sense of protectiveness. Normally, Sterling's world revolved around numbers, contracts, boardroom negotiations, and carefully calculated risks. He dealt with problems methodically. But this situation fell outside his usual strategies. There was no spreadsheet for compassion, no profit margin for altruism. Soon, the neon glow of a small gas station appeared in the distance. It was one of those old-fashioned pit stops with a single pump, an unremarkable convenience store, and a flickering fluorescent sign. Sterling pulled in, partly to top off the tank, partly to give Rowena a chance to stretch her legs and maybe open up a little more about her predicament. He parked near the pump and turned the engine off. The sudden hush of the night returned, interrupted only by the distant buzz of electricity coursing through the station's light fixtures. Rowena exhaled, as though she'd been holding her breath the entire ride. Before he could say anything, Sterling spotted a vending machine near the store's entrance. "Do you want something to drink?" he offered, stepping out of the car. "Coffee? Soda? Water?" She gave him a ghost of a smile. "Water would be great, thanks." Her voice was still quiet, but there was a touch of relief underlying her words. While Sterling busied himself with the pump and retrieved a bottle of water from the vending machine, Rowena slowly stepped out of the vehicle. She looked around the deserted lot, her eyes scanning the shadows. Although the station was technically open, the small building looked dark inside, and no attendant was visible behind the counter. The entire scene had a surreal stillness. As Sterling returned and handed her the bottle, he observed that she seemed more comfortable under the glow of the station's flickering lights than she had been by the roadside, yet a lingering tension remained in her posture. It was as if she was ready to run at a moment's notice, should the slightest threat reveal itself. He couldn't blame her. The world could be a harsh place, and not everyone had the privilege of safety that he often took for granted. Up until now, his successes had shielded him from life's everyday threats. Money could buy security, anonymity, even influence. But Rowena, he suspected, had not had such advantages. The suitcase of burdens she carried, whether emotional or literal, wasn't something easily solved with a credit card or a quick phone call. They both climbed back into the car, and Sterling resumed driving. While the gas station's fluorescent lights disappeared behind them, the sense of being alone in the world returned. Yet this time, the silence that enveloped them felt a tad more companionable. Rowena sipped her water, occasionally glancing at Sterling, as though trying to read him. There was a current of questions coursing between them, silent for the moment, but very much alive. Sterling wanted to ask, "Where are you going? Who are you running from? Do you need more than just a ride?" But he recognized in her demeanor that any premature interrogation would only push her away. She would share her secrets if and when she felt safe doing so, and perhaps trust was something that had to be earned piece by piece. He decided to offer a fragment of himself first. "My name is Sterling," he said, eyes still on the road but voice low enough that it felt like a confidence meant just for her. "Sterling Beaumont. I run a few businesses back in New York, real estate, mostly. It was an understatement, but he wanted to keep things simple. No need to overwhelm her with the fact that he was considered one of the top entrepreneurs in the city. Rowena nodded, acknowledging his attempt to bridge the gap between them. "Thank you again, Sterling," she said softly. "I'm not sure where I'm headed yet. Just, away from here." She offered no more details, and he didn't press her. Instead, he ventured, "If you're open to it, I can get you a place to stay for the night. There's a decent hotel in the next town over. I pass it whenever I make these trips." He paused, carefully choosing his words. "I know it might sound strange, but it's better than leaving you at another gas station in the middle of the night." Rowena's eyes flickered with conflicting emotions, pride, apprehension, and perhaps a spark of gratitude. "I appreciate it," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Honestly, a bed and a hot shower sound like a dream right now." Her candor surprised him. Despite her wariness, she was willing to accept his help. Sterling felt a wave of protectiveness surge within him again, an emotion he rarely allowed himself in the cutthroat world of big deals and power plays. Under normal circumstances, trust was something he doled out sparingly, but something about Rowena's vulnerability, and her quiet strength, was drawing him in. They continued the drive in silence, the long stretch of highway eventually leading to the faint glow of a small town's lights. As they neared the outskirts, old storefronts and street lamps appeared on either side, and Sterling pointed out a low-rise building with a discreet sign that read, "Hazelwood Inn." It wasn't the most luxurious place he could offer, but it was clean and safe, and that was what she needed right now. He parked the car and turned to Rowena. She met his gaze, her eyes reflecting a tangle of relief and uncertainty. "Thank you," she said again, with more conviction this time. "I'll find a way to repay you." Sterling shook his head slightly. "Let's just focus on getting you settled for the night," he replied. "Tomorrow you can figure out the rest." They walked into the warm lobby, where the night manager barely looked up from his paperwork. Sterling checked Rowena in under his name, ensuring the cost would be covered. He was keenly aware of how surreal this moment might feel to her. Hours ago, she'd been stranded on a lonely stretch of road. Now, she had a roof over her head and a comfortable room, courtesy of a stranger whose life she knew nothing about. As they headed down the corridor toward the elevator, Rowena cradled her backpack against her chest. The soft lighting revealed the weariness etched onto her face, her eyes seemed to hold the weight of many sleepless nights. Sterling walked beside her, each step echoing with unspoken questions. She thanked him again when they reached her room, her voice laced with an exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. He paused at the door, wanting to say something more, some reassurance that she was safe now, that she didn't have to shoulder her burdens alone. But he sensed that words might do little to soothe the invisible wound she carried. Instead, he gave a gentle nod and said, "If you need anything, my room is just a few doors down." She looked up at him, and for the briefest moment, her guarded expression gave way to something softer, almost grateful. "You've done more than enough," she murmured. Then she slipped into the room, quietly closing the door behind her, leaving Sterling standing there in the dim hallway with only the hushed hum of the inn's ventilation system for company. He lingered for a moment, listening to the lock click into place. A part of him wanted to knock and ask if she was truly all right, to dig into the puzzle of how she ended up alone on that remote highway. But another part reminded him that she had the right to her secrets, and he had no claim on her trust. Not yet, anyway. Returning to his own room, Sterling lay awake for a long time. The events of the night played on a loop in his mind, her figure illuminated by the headlights, the trembling tension in her voice, and those guarded eyes that held some untold pain. He'd walked away from countless encounters in his life, but none had lingered in his thoughts the way Rowena Finch did. He couldn't shake the feeling that destiny, or fate, or some higher force had placed her in his path for a reason. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him, and as he drifted off, he couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. Little did he know that this simple act of kindness, stopping to help a stranger, would spark events that would rattle not just his carefully constructed world, but the entire internet once the story broke. Yet in that moment, he was only aware of one undeniable truth: he felt a connection to Rowena Finch that defied logic, and it was a feeling he simply couldn't ignore. Sterling woke earlier than usual the next morning, a restless energy propelling him out of bed before the sun had fully risen. All night, thoughts of Rowena lingered in his mind, her guarded eyes flashing in and out of his dreams. He found himself pacing the small room at the Hazelwood Inn, drawn by a strange mix of curiosity and concern. Part of him wanted to knock on her door immediately and offer a listening ear, or at least some breakfast, but he held back, unsure if his eagerness would come across as invasive. Instead, he tried to settle his nerves by flipping through local news channels on the outdated television, but his attention was elsewhere. No headlines could compete with the mystery sleeping just a few doors down. Eventually, he decided that waiting any longer would make him look either uninterested or indifferent, both of which were far from the truth. He slipped into a crisp shirt, the simplest one he had managed to pack, and stepped into the hallway. The corridor was quiet, punctuated only by the faint hum of the ice machine down by the elevators. As he approached Rowena's room, he hesitated, taking a breath to steady himself. The memory of her face under the dim lobby lights floated to the forefront of his mind. She had seemed resolute but anxious, a woman carrying secrets that threatened to break her if she didn't keep them carefully contained. He knocked softly, 3 gentle taps that he hoped wouldn't startle her. For a few moments, there was silence. Then, just as he considered walking away and giving her more time, the door cracked open. Rowena peered out, her hair slightly tousled from sleep. She was wrapped in one of the hotel's thin, off-white robes, its belt knotted tightly around her waist, as though she still didn't fully trust the environment she found herself in. "Morning," she said, her voice faintly raspy. She took a moment to assess him, hair neatly combed, shirt buttoned, expression halfway between sheepish and earnest, and appeared to relax, if only a little. "I didn't mean to bother you," Sterling replied, noticing that her cheeks had a soft flush, perhaps from the warm shower she must have just taken. "I thought you might be hungry. The inn offers a small breakfast buffet. Nothing fancy, but it's something." Rowena opened the door a bit wider, revealing a humble but tidy room behind her. On the nightstand lay her backpack, half unzipped, with a small stack of papers visible inside. If Sterling's eyes lingered on it a second too long, he couldn't help himself. His curiosity was tethered to those documents, wondering if they contained the answers to who she was running from and why. She seemed to notice his quick glance but made no move to conceal the papers. Instead, she nodded in acceptance of his offer. "Give me a minute to change," she said, sounding more awake now. "I'll meet you in the lobby." Sterling agreed readily and headed back toward the elevators. On the ride down to the ground floor, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the tarnished metal of the elevator doors. He hardly recognized the man staring back. He was used to crisp suits, bustling New York boardrooms, and bold decisions that shaped entire industries, yet here he was, feeling like an awkward teenager waiting for a date. His heart pounded harder than it should have, and he had to remind himself that he barely knew Rowena. Still, he couldn't deny the urge he felt to unravel whatever secrets lay behind her gentle demeanor. The lobby was eerily quiet at such an early hour. A single receptionist yawned behind the front desk, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted from the small breakfast area off to the side. Sterling busied himself pouring 2 cups, one black for him, one with a splash of cream for Rowena, hoping she might prefer it that way. He wasn't certain why he thought so, only that it seemed to fit the impression he had of her. In the corner of his eye, he saw movement by the elevator. Rowena stepped out, wearing a simple sweater and jeans. Despite the plainness of her attire, she carried herself with a quiet grace that caught him off guard. It was hard not to stare. She approached, casting a curious glance at the rows of cereal boxes and packaged muffins on display. There was a wariness still in her eyes, as if the slightest hint of danger would send her bolting out the door. Sterling had the sudden urge to promise that no harm would come to her, that she was safe now. Yet he kept quiet, handing her the coffee with a tentative smile. She took it, her fingers brushing lightly against his as she did. The contact was fleeting, but it stirred an unexpected warmth in his chest. They chose a small table near a window that overlooked the parking lot. Outside, the sky had begun to lighten, with streaks of pink and gold spreading across the horizon. Rowena sipped her coffee, wincing slightly at the taste, which made him laugh under his breath. "Sorry," he said, pushing a sugar packet toward her. "Hotel coffee can be brutal." She added the sugar and stirred, glancing at him with a look that suggested she was still trying to figure him out. "Thank you for everything," she said again, her voice stronger this time. "I don't think I said it enough last night, and I want you to know I appreciate it." He nodded, taking a sip from his own cup. The bitterness jolted him awake more effectively than any alarm clock could. "You said you weren't sure where you're heading," he ventured carefully. "Is there someplace I can drive you? Maybe back to the city or wherever else you need to go?" She paused, lowering her gaze to the swirl of coffee in her cup. A flicker of distress crossed her features. "I haven't decided yet," she admitted. "I left in a hurry." She trailed off, taking a moment to steady herself. "I don't have a clear plan." Sterling leaned forward. "Then maybe you should stay put for a while," he suggested. "At least until you figure out your next steps. I have some business in a nearby town, but I could stick around longer." "Make sure you're okay." Rowena looked up in surprise. For a moment, something in her eyes softened, gratitude, perhaps, or even relief, but almost immediately, it was replaced by that guarded tension again. "Why would you do that?" she asked, sounding genuinely puzzled. He took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "Because I can. And because I want to. Look, I can't shake the feeling that you need help, and I have the resources to provide it. I'm not looking for anything in return. Just, let me do this for you." Her lips parted as if she was about to protest, but instead she let out a slow exhale and nodded. "All right," she relented, her voice tinged with caution. "But only for a short time. I don't want to burden you." They finished their makeshift breakfast in a silence that was neither tense nor entirely comfortable, an unspoken agreement settling between them. It was as though each recognized that deeper conversations needed to happen, but for the moment, the delicate dance of trust had to continue without sudden moves. When they finally stood to leave, Sterling offered to hold her coffee cup while she gathered her bag, and she allowed him that small kindness. He led her out to his car in the pale morning light, the inn's neon sign flickering off as the day officially began. Rowena carried her backpack, the papers now tucked away out of sight. Sterling caught himself wondering about them again. Were they letters, official documents, something more sinister? He fought the urge to ask outright. She would tell him when she was ready, if she ever was. The plan, if it could even be called that, was to check out of the inn and drive to a nearby town where Sterling had some property dealings to finalize. He figured Rowena could rest in a safer, more comfortable setting, away from the prying eyes of anyone who might be searching for her. The unsettled part of him that thrived in corporate boardrooms found the uncertainty almost unbearable, yet he couldn't ignore the pull he felt toward protecting her. It was a foreign sensation, this urge to put someone else's welfare above business objectives, and it both startled and intrigued him. As he steered the car onto the main road, he noticed Rowena turning her head to watch the motel fade behind them. Her expression was pensive, as though leaving that small room was symbolic of shedding more than just last night's shelter. This time, he refrained from asking what she was thinking, sensing she needed the quiet to process whatever was chasing her. Instead, he concentrated on the road, determined to project a sense of calm and control he wasn't entirely sure he possessed. They drove in near silence for a while, passing fields dotted with livestock and the occasional billboard advertising local attractions. From time to time, Sterling caught Rowena studying him in the side mirror's reflection. He pretended not to notice, focusing on the sunrise creeping over the horizon. The world looked fresh and full of possibilities, a perfect contrast to the lingering shadows that seemed to follow her. Finally, she spoke, her voice subdued but steady. "You said you do business in real estate?" He nodded. "Mostly. Buying and selling properties, developing them. It keeps me busy." She toyed with the zipper on her backpack. "I had a family home once," she said quietly. "Or at least, it was supposed to be mine. I'm not sure if it is anymore." He sensed the vulnerability in her admission, each word a small piece of a much larger puzzle. "Homes can be complicated," he replied gently. "They hold memories, attachments, responsibilities." Rowena let out a soft, humorless laugh. "That's an understatement," she said, her gaze drifting out the window again. "When I figure out how to explain it, maybe I'll tell you." Her words hung in the air, a tenuous promise that she might open up to him eventually. Sterling felt that flicker of protectiveness again, as well as a surge of determination. He couldn't fix everything in her life, but he could at least offer her a space to breathe. They continued on until they reached the small town Sterling had mentioned. It was modest, just a handful of streets forming a compact downtown, with older brick buildings and tree-lined avenues. He guided the car to a boutique hotel he frequented on business trips, a place he trusted to be discreet. The staff greeted him warmly upon arrival, clearly familiar with him, and offered a second-floor room with a view of the nearby park. Rowena stood in the lobby, taking in the polished tiles and the tall windows that bathed the space in morning light. She seemed momentarily lost in thought, her eyes flickering between the front desk and Sterling. He checked them in smoothly, slipping the clerk his credit card without hesitation. By now, Rowena appeared more resigned to accepting his help, though her posture still hinted at the barriers she kept firmly in place. Once in the new room, she placed her backpack on a small table and turned to face him. Sterling could see the conflict raging in her eyes, gratefulness pitted against caution, comfort versus the instinct to run. She swallowed hard, seeming to steel herself before speaking. "I don't know how long I'll need," she confessed, folding her arms protectively over her chest. "I can't give you a timeline or a reason that makes much sense yet. But I promise, as soon as I can stand on my own 2 feet, I will." Sterling nodded, meeting her gaze evenly. "I'm not keeping score," he said. "You do what you need to do. If you want to talk, I'll listen. If not, I'll respect your space." A faint smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, the closest thing to relief he'd seen on her face so far. That moment, more than any words they exchanged, reassured him that perhaps they were on the right path, two strangers bound by chance, stepping onto a road neither had anticipated. He left her to settle in, promising to return later with a plan for lunch or dinner. As he closed the door, a wave of introspection hit him. Sterling Beaumont was not the type of man who deviated from carefully crafted agendas, yet here he was, letting instinct and empathy guide him. The sensation was unsettling, but also oddly liberating. He had always prided himself on being logical, driven, someone who weighed every outcome before acting. But nothing about meeting Rowena Finch followed a script he could have written. In the corridor, as he walked away, he allowed himself a moment to breathe in the newness of the situation. A sense of inevitability settled over him, as if some invisible hand had gently nudged him off his well-worn path. He couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning, that each step they took together would lead to deeper revelations, ones that could either bring them closer or shatter their fragile alliance. Yet, despite all the unknowns, Sterling felt a curious spark of hope glimmer within him, a quiet conviction that sometimes, the most unexpected encounters could transform everything. Sterling left Rowena's room with the intention of giving her some space. After all, he had promised not to push. Still, his mind buzzed with unspoken questions about the vague references she'd made to a family home, and the look of loss that always flickered across her eyes when she even hinted at her past. Fighting the urge to linger in the hallway, he took the elevator down to the lobby, hoping that diving into his own business affairs might keep his thoughts off the mystery surrounding Rowena Finch. He set himself up at a small table in a quiet corner of the hotel's lounge area, flipping open his laptop. While he waited for his emails to load, Courtesy of the hotel's rather sluggish Wi-Fi, he made a few calls to his associates. As expected, he had messages from his real estate partners back in New York, urgent reminders about upcoming deadlines and contract negotiations that couldn't wait forever. Yet every time he tried to focus on the spreadsheets or legal documents flashing on the screen, he found his gaze drifting toward the elevator doors, half expecting, or maybe hoping, that Rowena would wander down, looking for him. After nearly an hour of half-hearted work, Sterling realized he needed a stronger distraction. He secured his laptop in a shoulder bag and decided to inspect the property he'd come here to evaluate. There was an office building on the outskirts of this small town, nothing especially grand, but the current owners wanted to sell, and Sterling's investment firm had expressed some interest. Perhaps if he immersed himself in that project, it would help him regain the steely focus he was known for. He left a message at the front desk for Rowena, scribbling down that he'd be back by late afternoon and that she could reach him on his cell if she needed anything. It felt strangely domestic, leaving such a note for a near stranger, but he couldn't shake the protective concern that had been growing in him. With that, he headed out into the crisp morning, the sunlight filtering through a line of stately trees that bordered the hotel's driveway. The property was a short drive away, past a cluster of antique shops and diners that gave the town its quaint character. Pulling into the lot of a low-rise brick building, he parked and stepped out of his car. A local realtor, Marjorie Trask, greeted him with a warm smile and an enthusiastic handshake. She was a middle-aged woman with a confident air, wearing a blazer that looked a bit too formal for such a sleepy locale. "Mr. Beaumont, I'm so pleased to meet you in person," Marjorie said, leading him inside. "The listing's been on the market for a while, but I'm sure you can appreciate the potential here." Sterling nodded, doing his best to match her enthusiasm. The interior of the building had the stale scent of long disuse, dusty carpets, fluorescent lights that flickered overhead, empty reception desks with abandoned office chairs. He paced the corridors, occasionally pausing to inspect the layout or structural details. His mind, however, drifted relentlessly back to Rowena. He wondered if she was resting or if she had ventured out into town. He couldn't quite dismiss the tingle of worry that she might try to flee. He had sensed more than once that her default instinct was to run whenever she felt cornered. "Are you all right?" Marjorie asked, interrupting his thoughts when she noticed him standing in the middle of a vacant office, staring blankly at a dusty window. He shook off the reverie. "Yes, I'm fine," he replied, forcing a small smile. "I was just considering how to update the space. It'll need new wiring, lighting, possibly a more open-floor concept. The walls can come down to create collaborative workstations." Marjorie beamed. "I agree completely. With the right budget, this building could become a modern commercial hub for the town. We've got new businesses popping up, but they tend to move out of the area once they expand." She leaned in conspiratorially. "I keep telling people we need investors who see beyond the peeling paint." Sterling gave a polite laugh and made notes in his phone as they walked back out into the hallway. Despite his divided attention, he found the property intriguing, an underused resource that, in the right hands, could flourish. He saw potential here the same way he often saw possibilities in the most unexpected corners of New York City. Usually, he loved the thrill of these discoveries. Today, though, his excitement was muted, overshadowed by the swirl of questions about Rowena. He wrapped up the tour with Marjorie, promising to follow up with her soon. She handed him a folder stuffed with property records and renovation estimates, all while extolling the virtues of local tax benefits and the supportive small business community. Sterling thanked her, then excused himself, eager to return to the hotel. Though it wasn't yet noon, it felt like he'd been away for days. A part of him yearned to see if Rowena was still there, if she had settled in a bit or decided to vanish once more into the unknown. The drive back seemed longer than before. He found himself accelerating on the open road, only slowing down as he neared the hotel's entrance, checking his rearview mirror out of habit. Something about the stretch of pavement behind him, though, made him uneasy. Was that the same gray sedan he'd seen idling near the office building? He couldn't be sure. It was far behind and kept a steady pace. As he pulled into the hotel parking area, the sedan continued past, vanishing around a bend. Sterling shrugged off the nagging feeling. He'd lived in a cutthroat business world long enough to develop a certain paranoia, but that didn't mean every random car was a harbinger of trouble. Once inside, he headed straight for the front desk. "Any messages for me?" he asked the attendant, who recognized him from earlier that morning. "None for you, sir," she said, handing him his room key. "But your companion, Miss Finch, asked if you could let her know when you returned." Sterling thanked her, feeling a subtle quickening in his pulse. So Rowena hadn't bolted, and she actually sought him out. That was progress, of a sort. He took the stairs 2 at a time, only slowing when he reached her door. After a light knock, he waited, hearing the muted sounds of footsteps from inside. Rowena opened the door, a hesitant smile forming on her lips. She wore a simple long-sleeved top and jeans, her hair twisted into a low ponytail. There were faint shadows under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept well, but overall, she appeared calmer than she had that morning. "Hi," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "Hi yourself," Sterling answered, noting the small changes in the room. The curtains had been pulled back to let in natural light, and Rowena's backpack sat on the desk, partially unzipped to reveal a scattering of papers and a frayed notebook. He tried not to stare but couldn't help glimpsing what looked like a property deed among the documents. The official seal on one corner caught his eye before she moved to close the bag. "I took a walk around the block earlier," she said, moving a pair of shoes off the chair so he could sit. "Needed some fresh air. This town is nice, quiet. It's been a while since I felt like I could just walk and not look over my shoulder every few seconds." Sterling settled into the chair, placing his folder of real estate documents on the nearby table. "I'm glad to hear it," he said, leaning forward. "I actually visited a property I'm thinking of buying. Nothing huge, but it has potential." Rowena offered a polite nod. "Sounds like you stay pretty busy." He chuckled. "Usually, yes. And yet I keep finding myself drawn here instead of burying my head in spreadsheets." A soft silence followed, charged with the acknowledgement that she was the reason he had upended his normal routine. Rowena inhaled, then exhaled as if steeling herself. "I've been trying to figure out a way to explain my situation," she said finally. "But every time I start, the words feel too tangled. Even just having the papers out makes my stomach knot." Sterling took a moment to consider his response. He didn't want to push or pry, but he sensed that her attempt to open up was a fragile step toward trust. "I told you before, I'm willing to listen whenever you're ready," he said gently. "I won't pretend I can solve every problem. But maybe I can help." She met his eyes, and the openness in her gaze took him by surprise. "I believe you," she said. "Honestly, that's new for me. Believing someone without expecting them to turn on me." Before he could respond, she turned toward her backpack and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She held it gingerly, as though it were something precious and perilous at the same time. With a shaky hand, she placed it in front of him. It was a deed to a piece of rural property, the name, Finch, written in bold letters at the top, along with coordinates and legal jargon about land inheritance. Sterling's eyes flicked over the text, noting a mention of a sizable acreage. "This was supposed to be my legacy," Rowena explained, her voice trembling slightly. "My grandparents worked that land for decades. But something happened after they passed. My legal guardian tried to get control of it through any means necessary. I don't want to accuse him of forging documents outright, but I know he manipulated things. I only realized the full extent of it recently, when I discovered he'd arranged to sell the land. He planned to keep all the profit." Sterling looked up sharply. "And you have no other family who could intervene?" She shook her head. "Not really. There's an uncle somewhere on my father's side, but I've never met him, and my guardian made sure I stayed isolated. That's part of why I ran. Once I confronted him about his plans, things got ugly." Her voice wavered on that last word, and Sterling's hands involuntarily curled into fists. He felt a surge of protectiveness mix with anger at whoever had forced her into this desperate situation. "Did he threaten you?" Rowena nodded, swallowing hard. "In more ways than one. He has lawyers, contacts, money. I don't. At least, not the kind I can easily access. My grandparents' land is all I have. I left before he could make good on his threats, took everything I could carry that might prove I'm the rightful owner, and started moving from place to place, trying to figure out my next move." Sterling reached across the table, covering one of her hands with his own. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low. "No one should have to go through that, especially not alone." She exhaled, and for a moment, the tension in her shoulders eased. "The thing is, I barely even know you," she admitted, glancing down at their hands. "But you're the first person who's acted like my problem was worth listening to. I'm grateful, truly." He gave her hand a gentle squeeze before letting go. "I won't pretend this is simple, or that I have an instant fix. But I do know people, trustworthy lawyers who've handled complex inheritance issues. If you'll let me, I can put you in touch with them." Rowena nodded, relief swimming in her gaze. I'd appreciate that." The warmth of the moment was interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. Both of them froze, exchanging cautious looks. Rowena immediately tensed, instinctively clutching the property deed closer to her. Sterling stood and walked to the door, pressing his ear against it briefly. He heard nothing but a faint shuffle from the hallway. He opened the door a crack, only to find a hotel staff member standing there with a polite smile. "Apologies for the interruption," the young man said, holding out an envelope. "This was left at the front desk for a Miss Finch. The person who dropped it off insisted it be delivered immediately." Sterling blinked, taking the envelope and offering a thank you before closing the door again. He looked at it warily. There was no stamp or return address, just Rowena's name scrawled in thin, slanted letters. Carefully, he handed it to her. Rowena's face lost what little color it had. "No one should know I'm here," she whispered, turning the envelope over as if it might burn her. She took a shaky breath and then slid it open with trembling fingers. Sterling watched her eyes dart across the note inside. With each passing second, the tension in her expression intensified, her lips tightening until they formed a grim line. She said nothing at first, only held the slip of paper out for Sterling to read. Scrawled in the same slanted handwriting were the words, "You can't hide forever. You know what I want." A chill raced up Sterling's spine. Clearly, her guardian, or someone acting on his behalf, had already tracked her this far. Rowena met his gaze, a quiet panic flickering in her eyes. He refused to look away, determination blazing in him. "We'll figure this out," he said firmly. "I'll get you somewhere safe. Immediately." A faint nod was all the response she could muster. The note fluttered from her grasp, landing face down on the carpet, and for a moment they both simply stared at it, as if it were a small but undeniable symbol of the danger closing in on them. Any illusions that they had time or space to plan were shattered in that instant. Sterling realized with a clenched jaw that what had begun as a chance encounter on a deserted road had escalated into a high-stakes confrontation that demanded immediate action. His mind spun with possible next steps. Should he call in private security? Reach out to an old friend in law enforcement? Or simply whisk Rowena away to a safer location? The longer he stood there, the more he felt the urgency gnaw at his composure. But one glance at Rowena's pale face resolved him, he would not abandon her to whoever was threatening her. "Pack your things," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "We're leaving right now." Rowena lifted her gaze, studying him as though searching for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, she inhaled shakily and began gathering her papers and belongings. As Sterling helped her, methodically placing each document into her backpack, he could feel his pulse thudding in his ears. He might not know all the details yet, but it no longer mattered. Rowena had given him enough to see that she was in genuine danger. Whether it was purely altruism or something deeper stirring within him, he was done letting her face it alone. They were in this together now, come what may. And as they stepped into the hallway, hearts pounding in tandem, Sterling Beaumont silently vowed that whoever was hunting Rowena Finch would have to go through him first. After a tense drive through winding country roads, Sterling steered the car into the secure compound of a secluded estate he kept hidden away for emergencies. The property, nestled among tall pines and softly undulating hills, exuded a sense of isolation that was both comforting and foreboding. Sterling parked in a discreet corner of the gravel driveway, far from prying eyes, and turned to Rowena, who sat quietly in the passenger seat, her fingers trembling slightly as she clutched her backpack. In the dim light of the dusk, their eyes met with a shared understanding. The danger pursuing her was real, and they had little time to waste. Inside the estate's modest yet tasteful guesthouse, the atmosphere was subdued. The interior was painted in calming neutral tones, with warm lamplight casting gentle shadows across wooden floors and antique furnishings that told quiet stories of bygone days. Sterling immediately set about securing the perimeter, double-checking locks, confirming that the security system was fully engaged, and even making a discreet phone call to a trusted associate who specialized in personal protection. All the while, his mind was fixated on Rowena and the unanswered questions swirling around her troubled past. Once they were alone in the softly lit living area, Sterling offered Rowena a seat on a well-worn sofa that faced a modest fireplace. The gentle crackling of burning logs filled the silence as they both sank into a temporary reprieve from the storm of uncertainty. Rowena hesitated for a moment before finally speaking in a low, wavering tone. "I've carried this burden for so long," she began, her eyes fixed on the dancing flames. "Every time I looked at that deed, I was reminded of a legacy stolen from me, a promise that my grandparents had built with their blood, sweat, and love. It was supposed to be my refuge, my future, but instead, it became the target of greed and betrayal." Her voice, initially tentative, grew stronger as she continued. "I was only a teenager when I first discovered the duplicity. My guardian, who was entrusted to care for me after my parents passed away, began to manipulate everything, documents, contracts, even the relationships I had. I confronted him once, hoping for an explanation, but his cold eyes and hollow words told me that he cared only for profit. I felt trapped in a nightmare, isolated and powerless, until I knew that I had no choice but to escape." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she recalled the moment of that painful realization, the sting of betrayal etched permanently in her memory. Sterling listened intently, his expression softening with each word. He reached out and gently took her hand, the contact conveying more empathy than any spoken reassurance could. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, his tone laden with genuine concern. "No one should have to endure such cruelty. You deserve to have what's rightfully yours, and more than that, you deserve to feel safe." His words were measured, but there was an undeniable tenderness in them, a promise of protection that transcended the businesslike detachment he was known for. For a long while, they sat in silence, the only sound the persistent murmur of the fire. The room, once an impersonal haven, now pulsed with an intimacy born of shared vulnerability. Rowena's gaze wandered to a small framed photograph on a nearby table, a faded image of her grandparents standing proudly on a vast field of golden crops. "They believed in justice, in honesty," she whispered, her voice catching with emotion. "I promised myself that I would honor their memory, even if it meant confronting my past and fighting the corruption that tried to take it all away." Sterling's eyes narrowed slightly as he considered the implications of her words. The deed, the threats, the manipulation, all pointed to a network of deceit that extended further than either of them had initially suspected. "We need to act carefully," he said, his tone resolute. "I have contacts, attorneys who specialize in inheritance disputes and investigators who can dig into these matters without drawing unwanted attention. We'll need to gather every piece of evidence you have and secure your claim. But first, you must be safe." His gaze held hers steadily, a silent vow that he would not let her face this turmoil alone. As the night deepened, the conversation shifted from plans for legal battles to quieter, more personal confessions. Between moments of strategizing and mapping out a course of action, Rowena shared details of her life before the chaos. She spoke of a childhood filled with laughter in a small town, of family traditions passed down through generations, and of dreams that had once soared high before being clipped by betrayal. In return, Sterling opened up about the pressures of his high-powered world, a life where deals were made and broken with cold precision, and where personal connections were often sacrificed at the altar of success. Yet here, in this secluded refuge, he found himself drawn to a depth of emotion that he rarely allowed himself to explore. At one point, as a storm began to gather outside, tapping softly against the windows with rhythmic persistence, Rowena stood and walked over to a window overlooking the darkened pines. The rain started in earnest, its patter a soothing counterpoint to the charged silence inside. Sterling joined her, their shoulders almost touching, as they both watched nature's display of raw power. "I've always been afraid of storms," she confessed softly, almost to herself. "Not just the ones outside, but the ones that come from within, a tempest of anger, fear, and grief." Sterling turned to her, his eyes reflecting the flickering light from the fire. "Sometimes, we need a storm to wash away what's old and painful, so that something new can begin," he replied, his voice gentle but firm. The intimacy of the moment, underscored by the sound of rain and the shared silence, broke down another of the barriers Rowena had so carefully constructed. In that fragile interlude, as the storm raged on and the safe house seemed to cocoon them from the world's cruelty, they found solace in each other's presence. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that beyond the legal battles and the threat of her guardian, a deeper connection was forming, one that was built on trust, empathy, and perhaps something more profound. With the urgency of the situation momentarily eased by the intimacy of shared vulnerability, they resolved to take the next steps together. Sterling reassured her that once the immediate danger had passed, he would help her reclaim not only her rightful legacy but also the life she was meant to live. Rowena, bolstered by his unwavering support, allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could finally begin to heal from the wounds inflicted by years of deceit. In the quiet hours before dawn, as the storm subsided into a gentle drizzle and the first hints of a new day touched the horizon, they sat side by side on a worn couch in the guesthouse's parlor. The soft light illuminated their faces, revealing a mixture of resolve and hope. They made tentative plans, outlining the steps they would take once morning came, contacting legal advisors, gathering more evidence, and perhaps even confronting the ghosts of her past. Yet amidst these practical discussions, there was a palpable shift in the air, a sense that this shared crisis was forging a bond that neither had anticipated. In that fragile, transient moment, with the promise of a new day on the horizon and the scars of the past still fresh between them, Sterling and Rowena silently acknowledged that they were no longer just a businessman and a troubled heiress. They were two souls, united by circumstance and choice, ready to face the coming storm together, determined not only to seek justice but also to explore the unexpected, tender love that had blossomed in the most unlikely of places. The morning light broke over the horizon with an unsettling clarity that mirrored the turbulent emotions swirling within Sterling as he prepared for what lay ahead. In the hours following the intense revelations of the previous night, a palpable tension had settled over the safe house. Sterling had spent a sleepless night organizing a discreet conference call with his legal and security advisors, meticulously laying out the strategic steps necessary to secure Rowena's claim and to shield her from the looming threat. The room, still heavy with the residue of whispered confidences and the remnants of a fierce storm, buzzed quietly with urgent preparation. Outside, the world was already waking, oblivious to the dangerous undercurrents that were about to burst into public view. As Sterling reviewed a series of encrypted emails on his tablet, his phone rang abruptly. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number, but the urgency in the tone of the voice on the other end left no room for doubt. This was a trusted attorney from his New York firm, calling with breaking news that could alter the course of events. The attorney explained that an anonymous source had leaked details about Sterling's recent decisions, including his abrupt withdrawal from a multimillion-dollar real estate deal, a move that had traditionally defined his unyielding, shrewd persona. Instead of the usual business-like rationale, the source had framed his decision as an act of personal sacrifice driven by love and protection for a mysterious young woman. Sterling's heart sank as he listened, knowing that the emerging narrative would not only jeopardize his meticulously built reputation but also thrust Rowena's private struggle into the glaring spotlight of public scrutiny. The revelation exploded across social media within hours. Headline after headline blared across digital news outlets: billionaire abandons deal for a stranger, business tycoon surrenders fortune for a love story, and mystery heiress or opportunist. The untold side of Sterling Beaumont's radical decision. Sterling's mind raced with the implications. He knew that the pressure from the media, combined with the potential backlash from influential business partners and board members, would create a storm that could easily drown the fragile progress they had made. The attorney's words reverberated in his ears, urging him to take immediate steps to control the narrative. With careful deliberation, Sterling convened an emergency meeting with his closest advisors in a secure conference room deep within the estate. Their conversation was punctuated by a sense of urgency and anxiety as they mapped out a response strategy to mitigate the damage. Sterling resolved that the truth had to be told, that his decision was not driven by some fleeting infatuation or reckless whim, but by a deeply rooted commitment to justice and protection for someone who had been wronged. At the same time, Rowena found herself caught in an entirely different kind of turmoil. The quiet sanctuary of the safe house had been shattered by the sudden influx of reporters and curious onlookers gathering near the perimeter, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward in a desperate bid for a glimpse of the story. A trusted member of Sterling's security team had informed her of the escalating media frenzy, and she felt a surge of vulnerability that she had never experienced before. The once private struggles that she had guarded so fiercely were now splashed across billboards and internet feeds, with details that were either exaggerated or twisted to fit an enticing narrative. Rowena's initial shock soon gave way to a resolute determination. She realized that if she were to reclaim not only her rightful legacy but also her autonomy, she would have to confront the public narrative head-on. Later that afternoon, Sterling and Rowena found themselves in the midst of a tense confrontation with a group of investigative journalists who had somehow bypassed the estate's security. Sterling, with his back straight and his eyes steeled by resolve, addressed the reporters in a calm yet firm tone. "I understand your questions," he began, his voice measured as he gestured towards Rowena, who stood slightly behind him, her expression a mixture of apprehension and defiant strength. "But this is a private matter, and any further intrusion will be met with legal action." His words, delivered with the authority of a man who had built an empire, carried an undercurrent of personal passion that hinted at the depth of his commitment to her. The reporters, sensing a vulnerability in his controlled demeanor, pressed on with their questions about the nature of his relationship with Rowena and the circumstances surrounding his abrupt business decision. Amid the barrage of inquiries, Rowena stepped forward, her voice steady and clear despite the rapid pounding of her heart. "I am not merely a prop in someone's story," she declared, her eyes locking with those of the lead journalist. "I am a person who has endured years of manipulation and neglect, and I will not allow anyone to exploit my pain for their own gain." The crowd fell into a brief, stunned silence as the weight of her words settled over the scene. In that moment, the dynamic shifted. What had begun as a sensational tabloid story was slowly transforming into a testament of resilience and personal triumph. Back at the estate, as Sterling and Rowena retreated to a more secluded part of the compound, they held a private conversation to chart the next phase of their plan. The revelation had been both a shock and a catalyst, exposing vulnerabilities but also forging an unbreakable bond between them. Sterling's mind, always so precise and calculating in the world of business, now found itself driven by a singular, unwavering purpose: to dismantle the network of corruption that had attempted to control Rowena's life and to restore justice in her name. He explained to her that he would leverage his vast resources, not only to fight the legal battle ahead but also to ensure that the public knew the full truth. "They can twist the story all they want, but we have the evidence," he assured her, his eyes burning with determination. "We will expose every shred of deceit that has haunted you, and I promise that we'll fight back until your name is cleared and your legacy restored." The conversation was long and intricate, filled with legal jargon intermingled with heartfelt confessions. They spoke of meeting with seasoned attorneys who had a reputation for taking on powerful adversaries, of gathering the necessary documents and testimonies that would dismantle the facade constructed by her manipulative guardian, and of the personal sacrifices that lay ahead. Each plan was woven with threads of both caution and courage, a reflection of the dual realities they now faced, one in the public eye, fraught with the potential for scandal, and the other in the private realm, where trust and hope had begun to blossom. As dusk gave way to night once more, the estate transformed into a bastion of strategy and refuge. Sterling sat by a large oak desk in his temporary office, poring over files and notes while the soft murmur of the security team provided a constant, reassuring background. Rowena, now more resolute than ever, had retreated to a quiet corner of the guest house, where she scribbled down memories and legal documents in a worn leather journal, a testament to her past and a roadmap for reclaiming her future. In that hushed atmosphere, where every whispered conversation carried the weight of destiny, both of them silently vowed to fight for what was right. They knew that the coming days would be grueling, marked by public battles, legal skirmishes, and perhaps even personal loss. Yet the shock of the revelation, rather than breaking them, had bound their fates together in a way that was as undeniable as it was unexpected. In the lingering glow of the night, with the storm of public scrutiny still raging beyond the secure walls of their sanctuary, Sterling and Rowena embraced the challenge ahead. They had been thrust into a maelstrom of deceit and ambition, but in their shared determination to seek justice, they had also found an unexpected source of strength, a love that, though born of chaos and conflict, promised to be a beacon in the darkest of times. That in the early hours of the next day, as a hazy mist settled over the sprawling estate, Sterling and Rowena awoke to a world that felt both fragile and laden with possibility. The events of the previous day still echoed in every corner of their temporary sanctuary, a private refuge turned battlefield for their intertwined fates. Over a modest breakfast served in the quiet dining room, they spoke in low, deliberate tones, reviewing the strategy that had taken shape during the turbulent night. Sterling's mind, usually so focused on balance sheets and property portfolios, was now consumed by plans to outmaneuver the forces arrayed against Rowena. Across from him, Rowena's eyes held a determined glimmer that belied the exhaustion in her voice, a silent vow that she would reclaim her past and secure her future at any cost. After breakfast, they moved to a small, sunlit room converted into Sterling's makeshift office. The walls, adorned with carefully framed blueprints and legal documents, bore witness to the relentless pace of modern business, but today they served a new purpose. Together, they pored over stacks of evidence, faded photographs of Rowena's family gathered in happier times, meticulously scanned copies of the disputed property deeds, and handwritten notes that chronicled the subtle yet sinister maneuvers of her estranged guardian. Sterling's fingers traced over the documents as if they were the contours of a map leading them out of the labyrinth of deceit. He explained, in measured and precise terms, how each piece of evidence fit into the broader puzzle of the fraudulent scheme that had threatened to strip Rowena of her inheritance. Rowena listened intently, her voice occasionally trembling as she recounted fragments of painful memories, stories of a childhood once filled with laughter in sunlit orchards, now overshadowed by betrayal and loss. As the day wore on, the safe house transformed into a hive of quiet activity. Sterling contacted his trusted legal team, orchestrating a series of confidential meetings with high-profile attorneys known for their expertise in inheritance battles. Through discreet phone calls and encrypted messages, he arranged for a comprehensive investigation into the shady dealings that had upended Rowena's life. In one such conversation, his tone grew more impassioned than usual, not merely as a businessman but as a man deeply moved by the injustice inflicted upon the woman who had unexpectedly entered his life. "We're not just fighting a legal battle," he insisted over the phone, "we're standing up for something far greater than property or profit. We're fighting for a legacy, for dignity, and for the right to love without being haunted by the ghosts of exploitation." At the same time, Rowena retreated into moments of introspection. Alone in a quiet corner of the guesthouse's library, a room lined with ancient books and softly worn leather chairs, she began to write in a journal with a resolve that belied her fragile exterior. Every word she inscribed was a declaration of defiance against the oppressive forces that had sought to erase her identity. She recalled the laughter of her grandparents, the sense of belonging that had once warmed her heart, and the promises made in hushed tones on moonlit evenings. With each written line, the storm of grief and anger began to subside, replaced by a burgeoning hope that she might one day reclaim the innocence that had been stolen from her. By mid-afternoon, the tension of their separate labors began to ebb as they reconvened in the living area. The space, previously dominated by the hum of urgent phone calls and the scratch of pen on paper, now seemed imbued with a tentative calm. Over cups of tea that steamed in the cool air, Sterling shared an update from his legal advisors. They had uncovered discrepancies in the financial records that connected Rowena's guardian to a network of fraudulent real estate transactions, a discovery that not only bolstered her claim but also opened the door to potential criminal charges. Rowena's eyes widened as she absorbed the gravity of the news. For the first time in months, she allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. It was a moment of catharsis, a reminder that even amidst darkness, truth had a way of emerging. Their conversation then took a more personal turn. The legal strategies and evidence stacks gave way to whispered confidences about their own lives. Sterling, who had always prided himself on his rationality and detachment, found himself confessing how deeply Rowena's struggle had touched him. He spoke of a loneliness that had accompanied his relentless pursuit of success, a loneliness that was slowly being replaced by the warmth of genuine connection. Rowena, in turn, recounted her own journey of isolation, the years of being manipulated and controlled, and the inner battles she fought to hold on to her sense of self. In those moments, as they shared fragments of their pasts, the safe house ceased to be merely a refuge from external threats, it became a crucible in which a delicate but profound love was being forged. Later that evening, as dusk melted into a star-filled night, Sterling and Rowena stepped outside onto a small terrace that overlooked the vast, starlit expanse of the estate's grounds. The cool night air carried a sense of quiet liberation. They sat side by side on a weathered bench, their shoulders nearly touching as they gazed upward. There, under the vastness of the universe, the weight of their individual burdens seemed to lighten, replaced by the shared promise of a new beginning. Sterling reached out, gently tucking a loose strand of hair behind Rowena's ear, a tender gesture that spoke of both affection and resolve. In the silence that followed, no words were necessary, the night itself bore witness to the understanding that, no matter how perilous the road ahead, they would face it together. As the hours slipped by and the estate settled into a peaceful, guarded sleep, both knew that the coming days would be fraught with challenges. The media would not relent, and the forces aligned against them would likely intensify their efforts. Yet, in that moment of fragile intimacy, they embraced the uncertainty with open hearts. Sterling's mind, ever analytical, had already begun to calculate contingencies and safeguards, while Rowena's spirit, though scarred, burned with a renewed determination to reclaim her rightful legacy. Their intertwined fates, once defined solely by chaos and legal strife, were now being rewritten by the quiet, persistent power of trust and love. And in that hidden sanctuary, beneath the silent vigil of the stars, they resolved to fight not just for justice, but for the chance to build a life defined by hope, authenticity, and an unexpected, profound connection that neither had seen coming. Dawn broke with a hesitant light that revealed new scars on an already fragile day. Sterling awoke before sunrise, restless and filled with a sense of urgency that had been building since the previous night's revelations. The safe house, once a quiet haven of plans and whispered hopes, now pulsed with tension as he prepared for the confrontation that he knew was inevitable. Outside, a soft drizzle began to fall, lending an almost mournful rhythm to his thoughts as he gathered the final pieces of evidence needed to challenge the corrupt network that had stolen Rowena's legacy. He moved deliberately through the corridors of the estate, double-checking that every lock was secure and every window was bolted. The world outside was already stirring, distant murmurs of an emerging storm that would soon mirror the chaos he anticipated in the coming hours. In the makeshift office, Sterling laid out meticulously organized files, digital recordings, and scanned documents, each a small testament to the deception that had been perpetrated against Rowena. His phone buzzed continuously with messages from his legal team, updates that were both promising and laden with the risk of exposure. Every notification carried the weight of a potential turning point, a breakthrough in the financial records, a witness willing to testify, or a new piece of evidence that might finally dismantle the carefully constructed facade of her guardian. Meanwhile, Rowena, who had spent a sleepless night in restless contemplation, emerged from her solitude with a quiet determination. She had written pages in her journal through the dark hours, pages filled with painful memories and fierce declarations of reclaiming her identity. Now, as she joined Sterling in the living area, her eyes shone with a mix of apprehension and resolve. She moved to the large oak table where he was sorting through the documents, her fingers grazing over the edges of faded photographs and scanned legal affidavits. "I found one more piece," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tremor of emotion that lay beneath it. From within a leather-bound folder, she retrieved a fragile, yellowed envelope. Inside was a series of letters and legal correspondences that detailed a series of illicit transactions and questionable property transfers, evidence that could not only invalidate her guardian's claim but also implicate a wider network of corruption. Sterling's eyes widened as he reviewed the contents. The new documents, brimming with details of clandestine deals and forged signatures, provided the exact leverage they needed. "This," he murmured, almost reverently, "is the key we've been waiting for." He looked at Rowena, and in that silent exchange there was a mutual understanding that this revelation would change everything. Yet with this triumph came a new kind of peril, the possibility that those who had orchestrated the deceit would now strike back with even greater ferocity. Before the weight of the situation could settle, the sound of rapid footsteps echoed through the stone hallway. Sterling's heart pounded as he peered through the slightly ajar door to the guesthouse's main hall. A group of individuals, faces obscured by the low light, moved with a determined urgency that spoke of someone who had been waiting for this moment. His instinct screamed that these were not ordinary visitors, they were agents of the very network they were about to dismantle. Without a word, he motioned to Rowena, and together they slipped into a back corridor, seeking refuge in a concealed room that served as Sterling's secondary safe area. Inside the cramped space, heavy with the scent of old paper and cold metal, Sterling connected with his security team via a secure line. His voice was low and measured as he relayed the new development and the imminent threat. "We have confirmation that they're on our trail," he said, his tone laced with both anger and resolve. "I need every available resource to secure our position and track these intruders." The response was swift, a series of instructions and reassurances that a team was already mobilizing. Even as he spoke, he could hear the soft hum of activity in the background, the shuffling of cautious footsteps and hushed commands over radios. Outside, the drizzle had turned into a steady rain that drummed on the roof, echoing the heartbeat of the safe house as the confrontation drew nearer. Sterling returned to the main room, where Rowena sat quietly at a small table, her gaze fixed on the new documents. "I'm scared," she admitted in a whisper, her voice trembling with vulnerability. "Not just because of what they might do, but because I'm afraid of what I might lose." Her eyes, filled with a potent mix of fear and determination, locked onto his. In that moment, the risk was not just the tangible threat of physical harm, but the emotional jeopardy of trusting someone with her deepest wounds. Sterling reached out, placing a firm hand over hers. "You are not alone," he promised, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. "We will face them together. And we will expose every lie they've built around you." His words carried the weight of his convictions, convictions that had grown from both his own hardened experiences in business and the soft vulnerability he now allowed himself in the face of Rowena's pain. It was then that the door burst open with a force that sent a shockwave through the room. Two figures in dark clothing, faces partially hidden by hoods, entered with deliberate speed. One of them, a man with cold eyes and an air of authority, spoke first. "Rowena Finch, your time of hiding is over," he declared, his voice echoing off the walls. "You know what is expected of you." The threat was implicit, a reminder that her guardian's reach extended far beyond legal documents and manipulated records. It was a promise of retribution. Sterling stepped forward, his body tense and protective. "You will not harm her," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. The intruder's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the air itself seemed to crackle with the impending collision of wills. The standoff was brief but charged. In that suspended moment, every detail, the glint of a concealed weapon, the rapid exchange of silent signals between the security team outside, the palpable fear in Rowena's eyes, became a testament to the high stakes of their struggle. A low, menacing laugh broke the silence. "You think you can defy the system?" the intruder sneered. "The very people who built your legacy are not so easily thwarted." His words, meant to intimidate, only steeled Sterling's resolve further. With measured precision, Sterling signaled to a nearby panel, activating an emergency lockdown that sealed off the corridor. Within seconds, the safe house transformed into an impenetrable fortress. The intruders hesitated, their expressions betraying uncertainty as they realized the trap they had walked into. In the midst of this tense confrontation, Rowena found her voice, a voice that trembled yet carried a fierce power. "I will no longer be a pawn in your games," she declared, her eyes blazing with determination. "My life, my legacy, will not be dictated by your greed and cruelty." Her words, imbued with raw emotion, resonated through the room like a battle cry. The intruders exchanged glances, their resolve faltering in the face of her newfound defiance. Sterling, standing close by, saw in her expression the spark of a woman reclaiming her own power. The security team, now fully mobilized, began to escort the intruders out, their actions swift and unyielding. The confrontation escalated into a flurry of tense negotiations and silent threats, the storm outside intensifying as if echoing the turmoil within. In the end, the intruders were forced to retreat, their departure marked by bitter curses and the lingering promise of future reprisals. Once the danger had momentarily passed, the atmosphere in the safe house shifted. The adrenaline slowly ebbed away, leaving behind a heavy silence that was punctuated only by the soft drip of rainwater and the distant hum of emergency lights. Sterling and Rowena sat together in the dim glow of a solitary lamp, their faces illuminated by the weight of the ordeal. Though shaken, they both understood that this confrontation was but the first of many battles to come. Yet within the crucible of that tense encounter, a powerful transformation had occurred. Rowena's defiant stand and Sterling's unwavering protection had cemented their bond in a way that transcended fear. In the aftermath, as they meticulously reviewed the latest developments and reassembled the scattered evidence, both of them knew that their journey was far from over. The storm of corruption, deceit, and personal vendettas had only just begun to reveal its true fury. Yet, bolstered by the events of that tumultuous morning and the mutual courage that had blossomed between them, they resolved to push forward. With every document examined and every plan forged in that fraught moment, they were not only fighting for justice but also crafting a future defined by strength, resilience, and an unbreakable trust in one another. As daylight fully emerged and the safe house fell into a guarded calm, the promise of a new chapter glimmered on the horizon, a chapter where love, forged in the crucible of adversity, would be the beacon guiding them through the darkness ahead. That eye and the fading light of a warm summer evening, the estate's safe house seemed to glow with a renewed sense of purpose. Sterling and Rowena sat in the spacious yet intimate sitting room that overlooked a manicured garden and a tranquil pond, the reflections of twilight dancing on the water's surface. The events of the previous days had settled into a quiet intensity, a mixture of exhaustion, determination, and a fragile hope that even the darkest battles might yield to a brighter future. Now, as they prepared to confront the final stage of their struggle, every detail of the room, the soft hum of a distant fountain, the gentle rustle of curtains in a mild breeze, the muted colors of worn leather furniture, spoke of an enduring calm that belied the storm they had endured. The day had been devoted to piecing together the final elements of their plan. Earlier that morning, Sterling had met with his top attorneys in a secure conference room within the safe house, finalizing the legal strategy that would expose the fraudulent activities surrounding Rowena's inheritance. The meeting had been long and taxing, filled with careful deliberations and a flurry of technical jargon that only served to underscore the gravity of their mission. Even as the legal team left with renewed determination, Sterling's mind lingered on the risks they faced and on the transformation he had experienced since meeting Rowena. After the meeting, Rowena had taken a quiet walk through the estate's gardens. Beneath the arching boughs of ancient oak trees, she allowed herself a moment to breathe deeply, absorbing the subtle fragrance of roses mingled with the earthy aroma of freshly turned soil. In these moments of solitude, she found a sense of reconnection with the past, a remembrance of happier days with her grandparents, a legacy that had once seemed so secure and now was in danger of being obliterated by greed and corruption. As she strolled along the gravel path, each step felt like a reclaiming of her identity, a small act of defiance against the forces that had long tried to silence her. When she rejoined Sterling, he was waiting for her on the veranda, a place where they often shared quiet conversations as the day gave way to night. He was leaning against the stone balustrade, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun had dipped low, painting the sky in hues of amber and lavender. His expression was calm, resolute, a man who had seen the worst of human betrayal and yet found the strength to stand tall. As Rowena approached, he turned and greeted her with a tender smile that conveyed both gratitude and an unspoken promise of protection. They sat together on a pair of time-worn armchairs, a small table between them laden with freshly pressed documents, legal reports, and photographs that now served as incontrovertible evidence of the corruption they had unearthed. The quiet of the moment was punctuated only by the distant chirping of crickets and the occasional call of a night bird. For hours, they pored over the final details, verifying signatures, cross-checking dates, and affirming that every misdeed was documented and every lie could be dismantled in the light of justice. Sterling's voice, usually so measured and impersonal in the boardroom, now carried an earnest timbre as he explained the next steps. Once we file these documents with the court, the truth will be undeniable. We'll not only reclaim your legacy, but we'll send a message that exploitation and deceit will not go unchallenged, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. Rowena's hands trembled slightly as she listened, but there was no trace of the uncertainty that had once haunted her. Instead, her gaze held a fierce determination, a declaration that she would no longer be a victim of circumstance. "I've spent so long hiding, believing that I had no voice," she confessed softly. "Today, I finally feel like I'm taking it back. I'm reclaiming not just the land, but my story." Her words resonated in the quiet room, carrying the weight of years spent in isolation and the promise of a future built on truth. As dusk deepened into night, the estate was bathed in the soft glow of lanterns and the gentle luminescence of stars beginning to appear overhead. In that serene twilight, Sterling and Rowena stepped out onto the veranda once again. The cool air was filled with the scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass, a reminder that even in times of struggle, beauty could still be found. They walked slowly along the garden path, their pace unhurried, as if each step was a deliberate choice to move forward together. The conversation turned personal as they shared memories of their respective pasts, Sterling speaking of a childhood spent learning the ropes of ambition in the shadow of his father's towering success, and Rowena recalling the simple, loving traditions of family gatherings that had once filled her life with light. Under the open sky, their conversation was punctuated by moments of reflective silence, each pause deep with the unspoken understanding that they were more than just allies in a legal battle, they were kindred spirits who had found solace in each other amidst chaos. Sterling admitted that his world of high-stakes business and cold calculations had left him empty at times, and that meeting Rowena had awakened a part of him he had long buried, a capacity for tenderness, vulnerability, and genuine care. Rowena, in turn, revealed that for years she had built walls to keep the pain at bay, only to realize that true healing required the courage to let someone in. Later that night, after all the documents had been filed and their plans set in motion, they gathered in the quiet of the safe house's library. The room, lined with well-worn books and antique furniture, had become a sanctuary where plans and dreams converged. Sterling dimmed the lights and put on a soft melody that seemed to harmonize with the rhythm of their hearts. As they sat side by side, the boundaries between protector and protected, savior and survivor, dissolved into a deep, unspoken bond. Their hands met on the table, fingers intertwining as if to seal the promise that they had made to each other, to fight not only for justice but to build a future defined by compassion, resilience, and love. In that final moment, as the night grew deeper and the worries of the past seemed to fade into the gentle hum of a world that was finally ready for change, Sterling and Rowena shared a quiet kiss, a tender affirmation of their shared journey and the dawn of a new chapter. They knew that challenges still lay ahead, that the battle against corruption was far from over, and that public scrutiny and personal vendettas might yet cast long shadows on their path. But for now, in the soft embrace of the safe house and beneath the vast, starry sky, they allowed themselves to hope. They allowed themselves to believe that love, forged in the crucible of adversity, could be a beacon of truth, a light that would guide them through the darkness and into a future where justice, dignity, and a shared legacy would prevail. As they finally returned indoors, their hearts were lighter, buoyed by the conviction that together they could rewrite their fates. The documents, the evidence, and the legal battles would soon be part of a public record, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And as they prepared for whatever would come next, they did so with the understanding that their journey, with all its scars and triumphs, was a story of hope, redemption, and an unbreakable bond that had been born out of the most unexpected of circumstances.